Thack-A-Nory, 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 Thack-A-Nory.
So welcome to Thack-A-Nory, number 2, depth of field. If you want to know why it's called Thack-A-Nory, then you need to look at our first, number 1, which is all about exposure. And in that, right at the end, we talked about depth of field, and we said depth of field, zoom in or wide iris, and you get a very narrow focus range. And that's what depth of field means. It's the range of focus. Narrow depth of field focus is very, very critical. Wide depth of field, wide range of focus, then you can go on forever. Horses for courses, you just want to catch the action. You want a wide depth of field. You probably want a wide angle lens as well. But if you want to make art, then probably you're zooming in and you're opening the iris up and you're making it look very, very sexy. And that's also how you do pull focuses from one thing to another, by having a very narrow depth of field. And as we said, zoom in, keep the iris wide, do both if you can, job's a good one. Today we're going to look at why is that, the techie behind why wide irises make for narrow depth of field. And we're going to also look at focal length and something you need to be aware of with particularly cheaper lenses, and that's called ramping. So to illustrate all that, I'm going to start by making a camera with no lens at all. It is possible, it's called a pinhole camera, and to do this at home you need a bit of card. Well, actually preferably you need a cardboard box actually, and a weapon. And so obviously in true Blue Peter style at this point you need to get an adult to help you do this, and the way to do this is to bore a small hole in the cardboard like that, and then to get some greaseproof paper and stick it behind the hole. That isn't going to work very well. You need to make it a box, you need to seal it. I've done one beforehand. It's not very good, I have to say, but it is there, and the gaffer tape is to keep the light out, and in the back of this is some greaseproof paper, and it does work. So let's go and have a look at it in action. So I've come to the top of our stairs because this window's got quite a useful blind with it. I've got my pinhole camera. I know this works. I'm going to point it here, bring the blind down. There's some lighting going on at the minute. We're going to turn all that off and see if we can see an image. So here we go. I'm going to place the pinhole camera just here. Now, it's not the best image in the world, but you can make out the slat in the window there. You can make out the sky upside down, of course. You can just about make out the house opposite as well. It's very dark, it's very crude, but it does actually work. So to illustrate what's going on with the pinhole camera here, I've got some very dodgy graphics that I've drawn. All graphic designers, shut your eyes. So I've got a retina, which is this black line on the right, and this little gap between these blue bars is the pinhole. So I've drawn our object of interest on the left, which in this case is a man. And what we need to note is if there was a ray of light leaving his head, only one ray would get through that hole. And it would hit the retina, and you would see his head upside down through that hole. Similarly, there would be a ray of light from his feet upwards, going the other way. Now, what we do in physics and optics is we leave out all those other rays of light in the middle. We just show the two extremes to show what's going on. But that is standard practice. Please get used to it, because you'll see that a lot in a minute. So we've got one ray of light from every point on the left to every point on the right, and that's how you get your image. It's as simple as that. The snag with a pinhole camera is it's extremely dark, because only one ray of light gets through. So wouldn't it be a really good idea to make that pinhole not a pinhole, make it bigger, because you'd then get more light in. Well, let's see what would happen then. True, you get your light going through from the top of the head to the bottom of the retina, but now you get lots of other bits of light going through as well. from the same place. So they would just spread all over the place. So here we have a complete graphic. From his feet, there'd be loads of light going all over the place. From his head, there'd be loads of light going all over the place. And from everywhere else as well. And lo and behold, you just get a completely fuzzy image. If in fact you get anything at all, if the hole is big enough, it will just disappear. So what we need is something that takes those diverging beams of light and bends them so they come together at the point of the retina. So they are diverted back together again. So if we had our beam coming from our man through the middle of the hole, but we've got another one diverging away to the top of the hole, we want to bend that to join back with the original. Similarly, we want the same happening at the bottom and in fact everywhere. And if we did that, we would have a bright image. And the toy for doing that is a lens. And we can see that in action right now. And here we are at the top of the stairs again. This time I've got a magnifying glass and a bit of greaseproof paper. We'll still have to turn the lights off, but we don't need to shield this at all because it's far easier to form an image like this. Schoolboy stuff. And there we are, instant success. There's the image. Now, it's still crude, but it's far, far brighter than that pinhole camera we were using a moment ago. Far clearer to see what's going on. So we've seen a lens in use there, a magnifying glass. It's the same as the lens in your camera or in your eye, more or less. And here's a graphical representation of what's going on. The light being bent by a fixed amount to hit the retina at exactly the right point. But there is a snag. With a pinhole camera, with only one ray of light going through that hole, if we move the man nearer to the retina, to the image sensor, the image just gets bigger. If we move him further away, it just gets smaller. With a lens, we are relying on the man being in the right place. Now in this diagram, I'm just showing the deflecting beams. We're not worried about the ones in the middle. We're just showing the ones affected by the lens pulling those beams in. So in this situation, everything is working reasonably well. There's our image of our man. But if we bring our man in closer to the lens, then those beams don't converge because lenses work by bending light over a fixed period of space. So in this instance, the man being nearer, fuzzy image. Now there is a way round that, and that is to cheat by moving the lens. If you move the lens, then you can get those beams to converge. That is focus. And with a pinhole camera, you don't have focus. It doesn't exist. Everything is always in focus. And in the old days, the masters used to get a garden shed, set up a pinhole in the garden shed, put up a canvas on the opposite wall and draw their masterpiece, because everything was always pin sharp. Similarly, if our man is too far away for where the lens is placed, then again the beams will converge early in this case and you will end up with a fuzzy image. So with a pinhole camera, you always have a sharp image. There's no such thing as focus. With a lensed camera, you have focus. Focus starts to become an issue. But that's not the case if you have a tight aperture. And the reason is, with a tight aperture, only those central beams of light actually get through. With a tight aperture, you are looking at a pinhole camera. As we open the aperture up, so those extra beams that are being bent in by the lens start to come into play. And so focus starts to become critical. Now the amount of bend that a lens puts in, and strictly speaking it's not bend, but we'll stick with bend for now. The amount of bend, the distance from the front element of the lens to the retina to the image sensor is the focal length. And this is expressed in millimeters. If you have a longer focal length, then the image becomes bigger. Because your sensor remains the same size, what you end up with is a tighter image, a telephoto lens. Now, when you have a wide lens, that has the ability to look at lots of light coming in. You can see that these red lines denote the amount of light that can come in to that lens. But when you have a tighter lens, you are throwing loads of light away. And the only way to keep the same amount of brightness in your image is to have a bigger bit of glass at the front. Otherwise, your image goes dark. Now, the ability of a lens to suck light in is known as its F. And this is the focal length divided by the diameter of the front element. And the bottom line of that is, the tighter the lens, the wider that front bit of glass needs to be. Because if the front bit of glass isn't wide enough, your pictures will go dark. Those funny numbers on the iris ring, the reason they're rather strange is because as you let in half as much light, you need to start using the square root of 2, which is why you get some really weird numbers. But the nearer you can get to an f of 1, the better the lens is. Now, on a cheapish lens, like this one, this is a standard Pentax lens, this is actually only an f5.6 lens. And as it zooms in, so it gets worse. Although this is still a cheap lens, it's basically the same. And you can see the front elements are completely different size. And that's because this one is f2.8 all the time, even when it's fully zoomed in. This rather impressive but still relatively cheap zoom lens, 300mm, but it's only f4, and when it's fully zoomed in, it's only f5.6. And as you zoom in, the pictures go dark, and this is known as ramping. I'd love to show you ramping, but I can't actually get any of my lenses to do it, which is good in a way. But if you do zoom in and the pictures go dark, or the aperture number starts changing in your viewfinder on your stills camera, that's because your lens has ramped. Most cheap stills lenses do it. Look out for it. There's nothing you can do. You can't open the aperture. Doesn't make any difference if you do. You just have to live with darker pictures, or pushing the gain up, or longer shutter exposures. You do see this sometimes, sports OBs, where they go in for the chairman of the club or celebrity or something like that. They're high up in the crowd and it's dark, and the camera's the opposite end of the pitch, and they're using good lenses. To give you an idea, the lens we looked at earlier, the long 300mm lens, that's a toy really, it's f4, f5.6. A professional, they would have a 300mm lens, 500mm lens, or even tighter with front element glass this big, but they would be paying thousands for them. Broadcast lens, wideish angle lens, 15:1 ratio, it's 15 times tighter than it is wide. You pay about £1,000 a ratio, so it's about 15 grand. Football matches, you need 50:1 lenses, 50,000, and sometimes 100:1 lenses, 100,000. Yeah, they cost money, and they've got sheets of glass at the front. Do look out for how big that front element is when choosing lenses. A prime cause of ramping is when you try and get your lens to be something it isn't, and a prime time that happens is when you start using ×2 converters. Nevertheless, they are useful. You can get them for stills cameras. Here's a stills camera, standard lens. I'm just going to do this on the widest setting for now. It works on the tightest as well. Point it out the window, take a picture, and now we'll take the lens off and we'll put a ×2 in the way. And on the same settings, widest setup, we'll take a picture and you can see that that is tighter. But you lose a stop by doing so. ×2s can be soft, but a good ×2 can get you out of jail. But when you start using ×2, you're starting to push the lens to its absolute limit, and quite easily you end up ramping. ×2s on video cameras, yes, they do exist. But the manufacturers knew what they were doing with video cameras, so they've included them on here as a switch. Not every lens has got one, but they're quite useful if you have got one, but again, look out for ramping. Well, I hope you found today informative, and perhaps see you on the next one.